The bone was still warm when she pulled it from the permafrost, 4,000 years after the last mammoth died, and its skull felt like it had been breathing just moments before. This wasn't supposed to be possible. Every textbook, every museum display, every nature documentary had declared woolly mammoths extinct since the end of the Ice Age. 10,000 years gone, swept away by rising seas and changing climates. But here on a frozen island north of Siberia, a Russian paleontologist named Sergei Vartanyan was holding proof that everything we thought we knew about extinction was wrong. What Sergei found next would force scientists to rewrite everything they thought they knew about extinction and reveal a secret that had been buried in ice for 4,000 years. The mammoth in his hands had been alive when the pyramids were already ancient, when Abraham was wandering Mesopotamia, when Bronze Age civilizations were building their first cities. This creature was trumpeting across an Arctic island that time forgot. Welcome to Wrangel Island, where the impossible became real and where the last chapter of the mammoth story played out in ways more mysterious and disturbing than anyone imagined. Imagine a landmass roughly the size of Delaware, floating in the Arctic Ocean like a life raft made of stone and tundra. Wrangel Island sits 87 miles north of the Siberian mainland, shrouded in fog for most of the year, lashed by winds that can reach 140 miles per hour. It's basically nature's version of Alcatraz, except instead of keeping prisoners in, it was keeping something far more incredible trapped inside. And yet, for 6,000 years after their mainland cousins vanished, a population of woolly mammoths made this frozen wasteland their final home. When the Ice Age ended around 12,000 years ago, rising seas turned Wrangel from a hill on the Siberian steppe into an island fortress. The mammoths trapped there found themselves cut off from the rest of the world, castaways on a chunk of land barely visible on most maps. Maybe 500 animals, perhaps 1,000 at most. To put that in perspective, that's fewer mammoths than people in a typical high school, and they were the only ones left on the entire planet. But here's where the story gets really weird. But here's where the story gets strange. These weren't desperate creatures clinging to life in the margins of existence. The isotope analysis of their bones tells a different tale entirely, and it's going to blow your mind. Right up until the end, the Wrangel mammoths were thriving. Think of these isotopes like a mammoth's health report card, and these guys were getting straight A's. Their nitrogen levels show they had plenty to eat. Their carbon signatures reveal they weren't stressed or malnourished. So if they were doing so well, what could possibly have killed them all? For 6 millennia, they lived as their ancestors had for hundreds of thousands of years, wandering the island's tundra steppes, following ancient migration patterns that led nowhere but in circles around their 2,900 square mile prison. The island itself seemed designed to preserve them. Unlike the warming mainland, Wrangel maintained the dry, cold mammoth steppe that had nourished their species for millennia. It was as if nature had built a time capsule and forgotten to set an expiration date. But isolation comes with a price that compounds with each generation. When researchers finally extracted DNA from the last Wrangel mammoths, they discovered something that redefined our understanding of extinction. These animals weren't just the final members of their species, they were walking genetic disasters. Let me paint you a picture of just how messed up these animals had become. Start with their sense of smell. A mammoth's trunk contains over 40,000 muscles. That's like having a Swiss Army knife attached to your face that can smell a flower from miles away. These giants relied on scent to find food, identify family members, detect predators, and choose mates. The Wrangel mammoths had lost huge sections of the genes responsible for smell receptors. Imagine if you suddenly couldn't taste chocolate, coffee, or pizza, except for a mammoth. Losing their sense of smell was like losing their entire social media network. Imagine the confusion. A mother unable to recognize her own calf by scent. Bulls who couldn't detect which females were ready to mate. The complex social hierarchies that had governed mammoth herds for millions of years began breaking down because the animals literally couldn't smell each other anymore. But their urinary proteins, crucial for marking territory and communicating status, had been corrupted by mutations. The chemical language that had allowed mammoth societies to function was deteriorating into gibberish. Most bizarre of all, many of the last mammoths were developing cream-colored translucent fur. The thick, insulating coat that had allowed their species to survive ice ages was being replaced by something that looked more like silk than survival gear. This is genomic meltdown. When a population becomes too small and isolated, harmful mutations accumulate faster than natural selection can eliminate them. Each generation becomes a little more broken than the last. Here's what makes the Wrangel story so puzzling, and why scientists are still scratching their heads about it. By all rights, these animals should have died out quickly. Genomic meltdown typically drives species extinct within a few hundred generations. It's like genetic Russian roulette, and these mammoths kept winning for 6,000 years straight. But their luck was about to run out in the most unexpected way. But the Wrangel mammoths persisted for over 200 generations. Despite their accumulated genetic damage, despite their social communication breaking down, despite their bizarre new fur coats, they somehow kept going. The answer may lie in their island prison. With no large predators on Wrangel, the mammoths didn't need perfect senses to survive. With abundant vegetation and no competition, they could afford to be inefficient eaters. The harsh Arctic environment that would have killed a damaged animal elsewhere actually protected them. It's as if they were living in a biological safe room where the usual rules of survival were suspended. Their genetic defects became merely inconveniences on an island where they faced no real threats. But this protective isolation came with its own ticking clock. Recent analysis reveals something even more disturbing than the mutations themselves. These weren't animals slowly degrading toward extinction. The most harmful genetic variants were actually being purged from the population over time. The Wrangel mammoths weren't dying a slow genetic death. They were winning their battle against genomic meltdown. After 6,000 years of isolation, they had stabilized their population and were beginning the long process of genetic recovery, which makes what happened next all the more devastating. Around 4,000 years ago, something changed on Wrangel Island. The mammoth bones from this period tell a story of rapid environmental shift. Sulfur levels spike dramatically. Think of it like a geological crime scene where the evidence is screaming that something went horribly wrong. The chemical signature points to something catastrophic happening to the landscape itself. And when I tell you what probably happened next, you're going to understand why this extinction was so much more tragic than anyone imagined. Picture the scenario. The island's central mountains begin breaking down faster than ever before, possibly due to unusual weather patterns. Minerals and compounds that had been locked in stone for millions of years suddenly flood into the island's limited freshwater sources. The lakes and streams that the mammoths had depended on for 6 millennia become increasingly toxic. The most likely culprit was an extreme weather event with an innocent-sounding name: rain on snow. But don't let the name fool you. This is Mother Nature's cruelest trap. Imagine this. An unusually warm winter storm hits the island, dropping liquid precipitation onto the existing snowpack. The rain instantly freezes on contact, creating a sheet of ice thick enough to entomb the entire island. Suddenly, the vegetation that had sustained the mammoths for millennia becomes unreachable, locked beneath inches of impenetrable ice. These are animals that need to eat almost constantly, processing hundreds of pounds of plant matter every day. Within weeks, the entire population would have begun starving. This wasn't the end of a failing species. This was the sudden termination of a genetic recovery that had been millennia in the making. The timeline becomes even more haunting when you consider what happened next. And here's the part that will absolutely break your heart. Just a few hundred years after the last mammoth died, basically yesterday in geological time, humans arrived on Wrangel Island for the first time. At a site called Chertov Ovrak on the island's southern coast, archaeologists have found evidence of Paleo-Eskimo hunters who established a seasonal camp around 3,600 years ago. These weren't mammoth hunters. By the time they arrived, the giants were already ancient history. The tools and animal remains at Chertov Ovrak tell the story of people who came to hunt birds and marine mammals. They built temporary shelters, crafted ivory harpoons, and lived off the sea's abundance. But they must have found the bones. Imagine those first human visitors stumbling across mammoth skulls scattered across the tundra, some still relatively fresh. The Chukchi people of Siberia still tell stories of giants that once lived in the north. Perhaps those legends began on Wrangel Island. The cruel irony is inescapable. If the mammoths had survived just a few more centuries, they they would have encountered humans for the first time. These weren't the sophisticated hunter-gatherers who had driven mainland mammoths to extinction. The Wrangel visitors were seasonal bird hunters, equipped with technology designed for much smaller prey. Would the mammoths have survived human contact? It's impossible to know. But considering they had already endured 6,000 years of genetic damage and environmental stress, it's haunting to think they missed their chance at coexistence by such a narrow margin. The final mammoth bones from Wrangel Island carry no obvious signs of trauma, no evidence of disease, no indication of gradual decline. They simply stop appearing in the geological record. One layer of sediment contains mammoth remains, the next layer contains none. Recent analysis suggests the final population numbered around 300 individuals. Picture them scattered across the island's 2,900 square miles, unaware that they represented the entire future of their species. When the crisis came, it moved faster than evolution could respond. The mammoth bones scattered across Wrangel Island carry lessons that extend far beyond paleontology. Small, isolated populations can survive far longer than theory predicts, but they remain vulnerable to sudden catastrophic events. The Wrangel mammoths show us that extinction isn't always a gradual decline. Sometimes it's an ambush. But perhaps most importantly, the mammoths remind us that survival isn't just about numbers or genetic diversity. It's about timing, luck, and the unpredictable nature of environmental change. The difference between extinction and recovery can come down to a single weather event. Today, Wrangel Island hosts the highest density of polar bear dens in the world. Arctic foxes hunt among the mammoth bones. Walruses gather on beaches where giants once walked. The island that preserved the last mammoths for 6 millennia continues its role as a refuge for Arctic life, a reminder that even the most desolate places can harbor wonders we never expected to find. And somewhere in the permafrost, there are mammoth bones still waiting to be discovered, each one a time capsule from a world where the impossible was simply another day on an island at the edge of existence, where the last of the giants walked beneath Arctic skies, unaware they carried the weight of 5 million years of evolution in their damaged genes and failing bodies. The last mammoth died alone on that frozen island 4,000 years ago. But here's the thing that still gives me chills. That mammoth had no idea it was the last of its kind. It probably spent its final days doing what mammoths had always done, looking for food, calling for its family, living as if tomorrow was guaranteed. And maybe that's the most human thing about this entire story.